It was a bitter January night in Seattle, the kind where the rain feels colder than snow and the streetlights cast more shadow than light. At 10:52 p.m., the city's 911 dispatch received a call from an apartment complex in Capitol Hill. The caller was a young man, barely able to speak between gasps of air. His voice was unsteady, almost slurred, not from intoxication, but from fear. He said his name was Ethan Parker. He claimed he'd been attacked by his girlfriend after trying to end their relationship. The dispatcher asked if he was safe at that moment. There was silence. Then Ethan whispered, "She's in the bathroom. I don't know how long I have." Within 5 minutes, 2 patrol cars were en route to the listed address, a modest one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a weathered red brick building. The kind of place that didn't stand out. From the outside, it looked like 100 other rentals in the area, damp balconies, flickering hallway lights, a buzzer that never quite worked. The officers knocked twice. No answer. The pause. Then Ethan opened the door himself. He was shaking. His face was swollen on one side, a fresh cut split the skin above his left cheekbone, and his nose had a dried trail of blood down to his lip. His left hand was heavily bandaged, the fabric stained a deep, angry red. His eyes darted behind them, toward the apartment, as if expecting someone to pounce from the shadows. "This, inside," he whispered. The officers stepped in. The apartment was eerily quiet, no music, no TV, no signs of chaos. Just stillness. Then from the sofa, a voice as flat as a whispering wind. "Did you call the police, Ethan?" Sitting cross-legged, calm and expressionless, was a young woman. Early 20s. Petite. Wearing a white oversized sweater and gray leggings. She looked up at the officers with no surprise, no panic, not even annoyance. Just vacancy. That was Kayla Monroe. The initial assumption was routine domestic violence. Maybe a heated argument gone physical. But something about Kayla's presence unnerved the officers. It wasn't defiance, it was the complete lack of any reaction, like she wasn't really there. She didn't get up. Didn't ask why they were there. Just stared. Ethan, meanwhile, was shaking now, not from fear of her, but from the memory of what he'd seen and what they would soon see. "She cut it off," he said, almost inaudibly. The officers glanced at each other. "My finger." "She used an axe." "It's in the fridge." No one moved for a second. The taller of the 2 officers, a veteran named Davis, gave a slight nod to his partner. Slowly, he approached the kitchen, a small corner sectioned off by a bar-height counter. The fridge door creaked as it opened. There were a few standard items: a carton of milk, take-out containers, a bunch of grapes. And then, tucked neatly next to the condiments on the top shelf, was a clear glass jar. Inside the jar was a translucent liquid, rubbing alcohol by the smell, and something small, flesh-toned, floating near the bottom. Davis didn't need to look twice. He shut the fridge quietly, stepped back, and immediately radioed in for backup and evidence technicians. Kayla never moved. Never asked what they were doing. She just sat, legs folded, fingers gently tapping her knees like she was humming a song in her head. At that point, protocol took over. The officers separated the 2. Ethan was escorted to a squad car for paramedic evaluation. Kayla, handcuffed without resistance, was informed she was being taken in for questioning. She asked only one question: "Will someone make sure the jar stays upright?" Her voice was casual, almost thoughtful. Inside the cruiser, Ethan kept repeating the same sentence. "She said it's love. She said it's proof I'm hers." Paramedics noted his blood pressure was elevated, and he was in the early stages of shock. He clutched his bandaged hand like it might fall apart if he let go. But more telling than his physical condition was the way he refused to look back at the apartment, or even say Kayla's name. He just kept whispering, "She was smiling," the whole time. Back at the precinct, the evidence jar was logged, photographed, and sealed. Forensics would later confirm that the object inside was, in fact, the distal segment of a human left ring finger, cleanly severed by a sharp blade. The cut was precise, no splintering, no hesitation. That detail alone would tell investigators a lot later on. But at that moment, none of them could process what they were seeing. The apartment had no blood spatter beyond the bathroom sink and the towel soaked in the trash can. No sign of a struggle. The crime was clean, clinical, almost curated. When the detectives arrived, they were briefed quickly. A 21-year-old male victim, deeply wounded. A girlfriend with no prior record, but a disturbing calm. A crime scene that was more symbolic than spontaneous. And a single, haunting piece of evidence that chilled even seasoned officers. This wasn't about rage. It wasn't even about pain. It was about ownership. And as Detective Sylvia Reyes stood over the open evidence bag containing the jar, she wrote in her notebook a phrase that would define the entire investigation. When love demands proof, sometimes the price is a piece of yourself. Little did she know, that was only the beginning. At 3:17 a.m., Kayla Monroe sat in interrogation room 2 of the Seattle Police Department. She wasn't handcuffed. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't even looking at the mirror, the door, or the detective seated across from her. She was calm. The kind of calm that wasn't silent surrender, but detachment. She smoothed her sleeves once, looked down at the chipped paint on the table, and then smiled. A small, distant smile. The kind that made seasoned detectives uncomfortable. Detective Sylvia Reyes, who had been in this game for nearly 15 years, had seen plenty, addicts who lashed out, abusers who sobbed, and sociopaths who faked both. But this was different. Kayla Monroe wasn't faking anything. She believed her story. She believed she hadn't done anything wrong. Born in 2001 in Spokane, Washington, Kayla had moved to Seattle at age 17 to pursue a career in content creation. She told detectives it started with cosplay, dressing up as characters from anime, video games, and fantasy novels. What began as a hobby quickly morphed into a profession. By age 21, she had over 180,000 followers on TikTok and was selling exclusive cosplay photo sets through private channels. Fans adored her. She curated her online identity meticulously, soft-spoken, sweet, with doll-like features and an almost ethereal presence. In every image, her eyes sparkled. In every video, she giggled shyly. But offline, according to investigators, a very different person existed. Her neighbors, interviewed the morning after the arrest, described her as polite but reclusive. No parties. No guests except that quiet boy who had moved in about a year ago. They remembered hearing arguments, but they also remembered how quickly she diffused suspicion. She'd answer the door in tears, one neighbor said. Apologized for the noise. Said they were just figuring things out like all couples do. Another neighbor, a nurse who lived directly across, recalled something more disturbing. I once saw her walking into the hallway at 3 a.m., barefoot, just staring at the elevator like she was waiting for someone who never came. I said hi. She didn't even blink. When Kayla was first questioned, she was polite. I understand why you're asking, she said to Detective Reyes. But I didn't hurt him. He hurt himself. He's been unstable for months. She went on to explain that Ethan had been emotionally unpredictable, suffering from self-destructive episodes, and that he had, in her words, begged her not to call for help. As for the finger, I kept it preserved, she said softly, so that maybe doctors could reattach it later. I thought I was doing the right thing. She said it without irony, without sarcasm, without a single blink. But Detective Reyes had already seen the crime scene photos. She had seen the care with which the jar had been stored, centered, clean, labeled with a strip of masking tape and the word, ours. That wasn't medical. That was possession. Back at the station, the forensic team was unraveling another layer of the case, Kayla's digital footprint. Though her public accounts painted the picture of a sweet young woman in cat ears and princess dresses, her private messages told another story. In a deleted chat log recovered from a backup server, she had written to a close friend. It's weird. I love him so much I want to keep him. Not just emotionally. Physically. I want a piece of him always close. There were similar messages, each more unsettling than the last. Screenshots. Photos of Ethan asleep. A short video clip, never posted, of her whispering to the camera while sitting next to him on the couch. He doesn't know how lucky he is. I'm the only one who'll ever love him like this. Investigators concluded that what they were dealing with was not just physical abuse, but psychological warfare. And Ethan Parker, by all accounts, had been systematically broken down. Ethan, still in medical care, was reluctant to speak at first. Not out of fear of Kayla harming him again, he was safe now, but because he still, in some part of his mind, didn't fully believe he'd escaped. She was perfect, he said during his initial interview. She made me feel seen. Special. Like I mattered. Then his voice changed. But then, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, I needed permission to leave the apartment. She'd tell me when to shower, what to wear. And every time I tried to speak up, she'd cry or threaten to hurt herself. Detective Reyes noted the familiar pattern, the abuser weaponizing affection, using guilt as a leash, turning love into a cage. And for Ethan, that cage had no bars, but it had boundaries. Invisible, constant, unbreakable. Until the axe. Until the jar. Until the night he dialed 911 from the only phone she'd forgotten to lock away. Back in the interrogation room, Kayla grew tired of talking. When the questions became too specific, when asked about the scissors found in the kitchen drawer with microscopic blood traces, or the axe in the closet, she simply stared at the wall. She tapped her fingers, folded her hands, waited. When told she was under arrest for aggravated assault, she didn't protest. When told she'd face multiple felony charges, she asked if her cat had been fed. That was the last thing she said before invoking her right to remain silent. And from that moment on, Kayla Monroe didn't say another word. Detective Reyes stepped out of the room and walked down the quiet hallway. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. A thin mist clung to the windows like smoke. She opened her case notebook and scribbled the final line of her report for the night. Behind every mask is a story. This one smiled even as she tightened the chain. The media hadn't caught on yet, but they would. And when they did, they'd be shocked to learn that the girl with the fairy wings and glitter eyeshadow was no fairy tale. She was a warning. And this case was only just beginning. Before the jar. Before the axe. Before the bruises and broken silence. There was just a boy scrolling on his phone and a girl in a costume smiling at the camera. It was May 2023 when Ethan Parker first saw Kayla Monroe's profile on Instagram. He wasn't even looking for anything. Just a quiet night, headphones in, thumb tapping through endless curated perfection. But when her photo came up, long silver wig, cat ears, delicate hand pressed against her cheek, he stopped scrolling. There was something hypnotic about her. In the caption she had written, "You don't need to save me. Just don't let go." Ethan liked the post. Then followed. Then sent a message. Something simple. Polite. She didn't respond. Not the next day. Not the one after that. It wasn't until a week later that he saw her typing. "Hi. I don't usually reply to messages. But you seem kind." That was how it started. Their first real conversation lasted 4 hours. He learned she was into anime, didn't like loud people, hated cold weather, and didn't trust anyone fully. She learned he was an only child, studied art at a local community college, and never had a serious girlfriend. She told him he seemed soft. He thought she meant weak. She clarified, no, like a cat. Quiet. Safe. By July, they were meeting in person. By August, she invited him to stay the night. By October, he had moved in. From the outside, it probably looked sweet. Two young people trying to make it work in a cramped apartment filled with plush toys and potted plants. But the shift, according to Ethan, was almost imperceptible at first. It wasn't like she flipped overnight, he said in his interview with detectives. It was slow. So slow I didn't even notice I was sinking. It began with gentle corrections. You shouldn't wear that color, it makes you look washed out. You don't need to talk to your friends every day, do you? I just want you to feel safe. Can't I be enough? And because she always said it softly, never yelled, never scolded, Ethan mistook control for care. By late 2024, Ethan had stopped texting his friends altogether. His phone, a gift from Kayla, had a passcode only she knew. He needed permission to check it. She said it helped him focus. His debit card was replaced with a joint account card she managed. She said it was easier this way. No overdrafts. No surprises. He agreed. At first. But he started noticing the little things. She knew exactly how long he took in the shower. How much toilet paper he used. Which days he skipped shaving. And any deviation, even small, was met with subtle consequences. If he came home 5 minutes later than expected, the food was cold. If he asked to go out alone, she cried. If he mentioned seeing his mother, she got sick, stomach cramps, migraines, always too sudden to be coincidental. The apartment became a pressure chamber. From the outside, still no violence. No shouting. No broken plates. But the oxygen was slowly running out. And Ethan, without knowing how, had become a ghost in his own life. The turning point, or at least the moment that, in hindsight, should have raised every alarm, happened on a rainy evening in November 2024. Kayla had just finished a new photo set in costume. Ethan was behind the camera as always. She looked beautiful, otherworldly, but her eyes, even then, had started to seem distant. After the shoot, she sat him down. "I want to try something," she said. He nodded, assuming it was another cosplay concept. But she didn't reach for wigs or makeup. She brought out a sheet of paper, hand-drawn sketches, arrows, and measurements, like a diagram of the human body. She pointed to the chest, then smiled. "Have you ever wondered if male nipples grow back like female ones?" she asked. Ethan laughed nervously. Thought it was a joke. It wasn't. She left the room and returned with a pair of surgical scissors. He froze. The cut happened in under 2 seconds. No warning. No countdown. Just cold steel and hot pain. Ethan collapsed on the floor, gasping, blood soaking through his shirt. Kayla, unshaken, knelt beside him, gently cleaned the wound, and wrapped gauze around his torso. She kissed his forehead. Whispered, "It's because I love you too much. I had to know. I'm sorry. Please don't cry." And he didn't. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering who she really was. And why he hadn't seen it sooner. Detectives would later ask Ethan why he didn't run then. Why he didn't call someone, anyone. His answer was simple. "I thought maybe I deserved it." That's what abuse does when it's slow. It teaches you that the walls were always there. That the key was never yours. And by the time you realize you're a prisoner, you've forgotten how to scream. By December, Kayla had quit her job completely. Stayed home every hour of the day. She said it was so they could heal together. But Ethan knew the truth. She didn't want him out of her sight. She had become warden, nurse, and lover, all in one. And every time she opened the refrigerator, glanced at the glass jar that would soon hold a piece of him, and smiled. He knew. He wasn't her boyfriend anymore. He was her property. By winter, the bruises had stopped fading. Ethan Parker had learned to wear long sleeves, even indoors. Not because Kayla told him to, she never needed to. It had become instinct. Like a stray dog learning to flinch before the hand even rises. To the outside world, everything still looked intact. Their apartment stayed quiet most of the time. Rent was paid. Groceries were stocked. No loud arguments spilled into the hallway. No broken dishes, no visible signs of violence. But inside that small third-floor unit in Capitol Hill, Ethan was unraveling one thread at a time. It wasn't always fists. In fact, it rarely was. Kayla's methods were more refined. More intimate. She knew which words left bruises that wouldn't heal. And when words didn't work, she had other tools. Scissors, fingernails, a cold stare that could hollow out your soul. Ethan learned to read her silence like a threat. The neighbors had started to notice something. In early December 2024, a woman living next door, Janet Lynn, mid-40s, accountant, heard a sound at 2 a.m. A sharp scream. Then something like furniture being dragged across the floor. She told herself it was just a bad dream. Or a movie playing too loud. But the next morning, when she saw Ethan in the hallway, she hesitated. His left eye was swollen. A deep purple bruising bloomed down the side of his cheek. He smiled when she said good morning. A forced smile, tight, with blood at the corner of his lip that hadn't been cleaned properly. "You all right?" she asked gently. "I tripped over the humidifier," he answered. "All good." She didn't believe him. But what could she do? She called the police that night anyway. Seattle PD has protocols for domestic disturbance calls. When they knocked, Kayla answered. Her eyes were teary, voice shaking. I'm so sorry, she said. It was just a misunderstanding. He gets overwhelmed sometimes. I love him so much, I think I smother him. Officers looked inside. Ethan was on the couch, blanket pulled to his chin. He looked pale, defeated. Sir, do you need medical attention? They asked. He shook his head. Do you feel safe here? Yes. Are you sure? He nodded, looked at Kayla, then back at the officer. I'm fine. Without a complaint, they had no grounds to search further or intervene. This pattern repeated itself 4 times between November and January. Always the same. A neighbor hears a noise. Calls are made. Kayla answers the door with quivering eyes and a soft voice. Ethan remains silent, compliant. Case closed. But there were signs, little things that built a mosaic of misery. One neighbor noticed Ethan always took out the trash late at night, and always with his right hand only. Another saw that he walked with a slight limp, though he never mentioned any injury. One evening, a delivery driver reported hearing whispering behind the apartment door. Something that sounded like, please don't, followed by silence. All of it fragments. Pieces. Not enough to stop the storm. The final straw came not from neighbors or police, but from something far more chilling. A conversation Ethan recounted later, in one of the few moments he could speak without trembling. It was mid-January, just days before the 911 call that would change everything. They had been sitting on the couch. No argument. No tension. She was resting her head on his lap, scrolling her phone. Then suddenly out of nowhere she said, You know, if you ever left me, I wouldn't hurt you out of anger. I'd hurt you out of love. Because I'd rather keep a piece of you than lose all of you. Ethan didn't know what to say. He laughed nervously. She didn't laugh back. She just smiled, that small, unreadable smile, and kissed his wrist. Later that night, while brushing his teeth, he noticed the bathroom drawer had a small box inside it. Bandages, alcohol swabs, and a pair of surgical scissors. Already prepared. Detectives reviewing the case file labeled this period as Phase 3, a stage of pre-violence conditioning where the victim is emotionally paralyzed and the abuser escalates control to physical manipulation. Kayla didn't just isolate Ethan from friends or finances. She had stripped away his reality. In a medical assessment conducted after his rescue, paramedics noted 2 fractured ribs in the healing stage, soft tissue trauma on his right thigh, a healing wound on his chest consistent with sharp object laceration, and of course, the severed segment of his left ring finger. But beyond the body was the mind. Ethan flinched at loud voices. He whispered when speaking, even in safety. He kept apologizing, to doctors, to officers, even to the nurse who cleaned his wounds. I'm sorry, he said. I must have made her feel unsafe. The words stunned everyone in the room. That's what emotional captivity does. It turns the victim into the villain in their own head. When asked why he waited so long to call for help, Ethan only said, because if she found out, I knew she wouldn't scream. She wouldn't hit. She'd just smile and do something I couldn't come back from. Kayla Monroe never shouted. She never chased Ethan with a knife or slammed a door. What she did was quieter, colder. She peeled his identity away, layer by layer, until all that remained was silence, obedience, and a jar in the refrigerator. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a stormy night. Not a holiday. Not some anniversary marked in red on a calendar. Just a plain, gray Tuesday in January, cold enough to keep the windows shut, quiet enough for no one to hear the scream. Ethan didn't see it coming. Or maybe he did, in fragments. The way someone senses a tremor long before the earthquake hits. The day started the way most of them did. Kayla made coffee, 2 cups, though she always drank hers slowly, letting it go cold. She watched him from across the table as he stirred sugar into his cup. Her eyes didn't blink much anymore. Ethan asked, almost carefully, if he could go see his mother that weekend. She was sick. He hadn't visited in months. Kayla smiled. That's sweet, she said. But what if she doesn't recognize you anymore? He didn't answer. He didn't know how. Later that afternoon, while he was folding laundry, she brought up weddings. Do you think you'll ever get married? She asked without looking up from her phone. Ethan paused. I don't know. Maybe someday. To who? It was a trap. He knew that tone. To someone who understands me, I guess. She looked up then. Her expression unreadable. I understand you, she said. And that was the end of the conversation. Or so he thought. That night, everything felt wrong. The apartment was too quiet. Kayla wasn't humming like she usually did. She didn't cook dinner. She barely moved. Just sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the dark TV screen like it was speaking to her. Ethan was in the kitchen, trying to reheat leftovers, when she called his name. Her voice was too soft. Too smooth. Come here, she said. He obeyed. She held something in her hands. Wrapped in a towel. Solid. A moment passed before she unwrapped it. A small hatchet. Handle dark red, almost elegant. Ethan backed up instinctively, but Kayla smiled, that calm, chilling smile that made everything worse. You said you'd leave, she said. Ethan shook his head. No, You want to go back to your old life. Pretend none of this happened. I just wanted to marry someone else. Wear a ring. Touch her hand. Say vows. He didn't speak. His heart was in his throat. His hand, his left hand, instinctively curled into a fist. She stood up. You don't need that finger, she said. And before he could move, she grabbed his wrist, pushed him back against the wall, and brought the hatchet down. Pain exploded through his body, not sharp, but overwhelming. His scream never made it past his throat. He collapsed, vision blurring, the world shrinking to one point of white-hot agony. Blood hit the floor in heavy splashes. Kayla dropped the hatchet beside him and knelt down, not panicked, not frantic. She picked up the severed segment, the tip of his left ring finger, and walked to the kitchen. He heard the clink of a glass jar, the glug of rubbing alcohol being poured. She placed the finger inside the jar like it was something delicate, sacred. Then she sealed the lid and set it in the refrigerator, right next to the milk. When she came back, Ethan was still conscious. Barely. She bandaged his hand with medical supplies she had already prepared, gauze, tape, antiseptic. She worked quickly, efficiently. As she wrapped the final layer, she whispered, It's clean now. Preserved. It's part of you, but it stays with me. He couldn't speak. Couldn't move. He just lay there, breath shallow, feeling the cold tighten around his chest. That night he passed in and out of sleep. Every time he woke, Kayla was there, sitting beside the bed, watching him. Her hands folded in her lap, her head tilted slightly, like a painting that followed you with its eyes. She said things low and tender. You'll never leave me now. I love you enough to keep a part of you forever. You belong here. You belong to me. In the morning, she made breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Toast. Orange juice. She set the plate in front of him and kissed his forehead. You need to eat, she said. You lost a lot of blood. He didn't touch the food. He barely blinked. All he could see was the refrigerator. All he could feel was the bandage wrapped around what used to be his finger. The days blurred after that. She didn't let him get up much. She bathed him, fed him, monitored his pills. He wasn't allowed near the phone. The only light came from the window, and even that was sometimes shut out. And then, once or twice a day, she'd go to the fridge. Open it slowly. Check the jar. Sometimes she'd take it out, hold it to the light, smile. Sometimes she'd show it to him, like it was a love letter. According to forensic analysts, the jar was meticulously sealed. The alcohol level was consistent with proper preservation methods. The cut itself was surgical, clean edges, no splintering, no hesitation. The evidence wasn't just brutal. It was calculated, premeditated, intended not to kill, but to claim. Ethan's medical records describe the injury as irreversible amputation of the distal phalanx of the left fourth digit. A cold way of saying, he can never wear a ring again. Which, according to her, was the point. When Detective Reyes saw the crime scene photos, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then she wrote one line in her field notebook. Not a weapon of rage. A ritual of ownership. Kayla never denied what she did. Only why? She was afraid, her defense would later say, of being left, of being replaced. But fear doesn't make you preserve a finger in a jar. Obsession does. Control does. The kind that doesn't scream or punch. The kind that simply smiles and says, "You're mine now, and I'll keep the part that matters most." Ethan Parker had stopped believing in rescue. By the end of January, he no longer dreamed of freedom, only of stillness. Of a moment when the pain would pause long enough for him to feel like himself again. Even if just for a few seconds. Kayla had become his universe. Not because he chose her, but because she erased everything else. She slept beside him. Woke when he stirred. Monitored his movements like a nurse with a broken patient. He hadn't touched a phone in weeks. Hadn't stepped outside in over a month. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city went quiet enough for him to hear his own breath, he'd think about what it might feel like to call for help. He just never thought he'd get the chance. On the evening of January 28, 2025, the air in the apartment was unusually tense. Kayla had snapped over something small, a comment Ethan made about wanting fresh air. She struck him across the face. Harder than usual. His nose bled instantly and he fell back against the wall. She didn't apologize. She didn't soothe him. She just stood there, chest rising and falling, her eyes sharp and silent. Then, as quickly as the storm came, it passed. She told him she was going to take a shower. And that's when it happened. Ethan, still holding his face, felt something shift inside him. A flicker, not of courage, but of desperation. Not now, then never. He knew where her phone was, locked away in a jewelry box, inside a safe, key tucked inside her bathrobe, which she always kept near her. But what she had forgotten, what she had never noticed, was the landline telephone beneath the bed. A dusty, unused relic she had tossed aside months ago. Ethan crawled. His face was still bleeding, his hand shaking, his vision blurred from swelling and fear. But he found it. The cord tangled, the buttons faded. He picked up the receiver. The dial tone rang in his ear like thunder. He punched 911 and whispered, "Help." The dispatcher's name was Angela. She later testified that it was the quietest emergency call she'd ever received, but also the clearest. The male voice was trembling. His words were short, spaced by sharp breaths. He gave an address. A name. A warning. "She's in the shower. I don't know how long I have. There's a jar in the fridge. Please hurry." By the time the first patrol car arrived, only 6 minutes had passed. Kayla was sitting on the couch, brushing her wet hair, a towel draped over her lap. She looked up, puzzled but unfazed. Ethan opened the door. Blood still stained his nose. His eyes were wide. Silent. The officers asked if everything was all right. Ethan pointed to the fridge. Kayla didn't resist at first. She even laughed lightly when they asked her to stand up. "I assume this is a mistake," she said. "We're just a little dramatic tonight." But when one officer opened the refrigerator and found the jar, sealed, labeled, chillingly intact, the temperature in the room dropped. She turned toward them. And that's when she realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was over. The moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her entire demeanor changed. She gasped. Not in fear, in offense. "You're arresting me? For what?" That finger was his. She thrashed once, trying to twist away. Ethan flinched instinctively. But the officers held her firm. Kayla screamed, "I saved it. I was going to take it to the hospital. It wasn't mine. He gave it to me." The words made no sense. But her panic was real. The control she had held for so long was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. On the ride to the station, she fell silent again. Pressed her forehead to the window. Didn't ask about Ethan. Didn't ask about lawyers. Didn't cry. At Seattle Police Headquarters, she was booked on suspicion of aggravated assault and unlawful imprisonment. But that was just the beginning. Detectives had already begun securing warrants for the apartment. And within 48 hours, they found what they needed. The hatchet, hidden in a closet drawer behind a stack of cosplay props. The bandages, stained with traces of blood. The scissors, still holding skin cell residue from a prior wound. And perhaps most damning, a notebook filled with disturbing sketches and notes. One page simply read, "What is love if it can leave? Keep something. That way it can't." During her first formal interrogation, Kayla was oddly composed again. She denied hurting Ethan. Said he had episodes. That he was fragile. That he wanted her to help preserve him. She said she bandaged him because she cared. She said she loved him. Detective Sylvia Reyes didn't argue. She just slid the evidence photos across the table. The jar. The finger. The matching DNA. The pre-purchased surgical supplies. Kayla stared at the images for several seconds. Then pushed them back. Her voice went flat. "I was protecting him," she said. "He would have disappeared. At least now, a part of him stays." Reyes stood up, closed her notebook. The room had gone cold. Outside, the rain had started again. Another Seattle night. Another name added to the list of those who mistook control for love. And nearly didn't survive it. The headlines came first. Seattle cosplayer arrested in shocking abuse case. TikTok star preserved boyfriend's finger in jar, police say. Cosplay queen or cold-blooded abuser? Within 24 hours of her arrest, Kayla Monroe's carefully curated online image shattered like glass. Her fan pages went dark. Sponsorships vanished. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds, some still defending her, others in utter disbelief. They couldn't reconcile the soft-spoken girl in cat ears with the woman accused of cutting off her boyfriend's finger and storing it next to the milk. But law enforcement wasn't interested in hashtags or cosplay edits. They had a case to build. The prosecution worked fast. By February 15th, the King County District Attorney had filed 3 felony charges against Kayla Monroe. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Intentional maiming. Coercive control resulting in bodily harm. Each carried potential sentences of 10 to 15 years under Washington state law. She was denied bail. The presiding judge cited the symbolic nature of the violence and the risk of psychological manipulation if released. Kayla didn't flinch when the decision was read. She only asked, "Will someone feed my cat?" Inside the courtroom, Kayla's defense built a narrative that hovered between mental instability and misunderstood affection. They painted her as a troubled artist, overwhelmed by a collapsing sense of identity, overattached to a young man who needed her more than he knew. They argued the finger incident was not an act of rage, but of psychological breakdown. They said she never intended to kill Ethan, that she believed she was helping him, preserving him, protecting what they had. But the evidence said otherwise. Detectives found meticulous notes in her apartment. Sketches of hands. Diagrams. Plans for emotional bonding experiments. A list of things she would keep if he ever left. It included a lock of hair, his pass was, a blood sample, and one final item, a ring finger, as proof. These weren't delusions. They were blueprints. Ethan testified, though not in front of Kayla. He spoke from a remote chamber via closed-circuit video. His voice cracked. His hand, now permanently altered, shook slightly as he turned the pages of his statement. He didn't sound angry. He didn't even sound afraid. He just sounded exhausted. He described the early days, the sweetness, the intimacy. Then the slow descent, the isolation, the gaslighting, the quiet domination. He spoke of the night she cut him. He described how she held the finger up to the light before sealing the jar, like it was a gemstone. The courtroom was silent. Even Kayla blinked more than usual. The most haunting moment came near the end of his statement. Ethan said, "I wasn't just missing a part of my hand. I was missing a part of who I used to be." And she kept both, right there in that refrigerator. The prosecution rested after 5 days. The defense requested psychiatric evaluation, hoping to shift the trial toward diminished capacity. But Kayla passed every test. She was found mentally competent, fully aware of her actions, and capable of understanding right from wrong. In fact, she never denied doing it. Only that it was wrong. She said it was love, one forensic psychologist noted. But her definition of love was indistinguishable from captivity. The verdict came on June 6, 2025. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for July. Kayla remained silent throughout. When the judge asked if she wished to speak before sentencing, she stood, brushed her hair behind her ear, and simply said, "I didn't want to hurt him. I just didn't want to lose him." Then she sat down. No tears. No apologies. Just the quiet confidence of someone who believed, even now, that she was right. She was sentenced to 32 years in prison without parole. The judge cited extreme emotional cruelty and calculated violence as aggravating factors. Kayla showed no reaction. Only when asked to sign intake documents at the women's correctional facility did she pause. She picked up the pen, looked at her signature, then whispered, "Can I still send him a letter?" No one answered. Back in Seattle, Ethan moved away. Changed his phone number. Deleted his social media. According to court documents, he began therapy and started auditing classes again at a different college. His left hand, now missing part of the ring finger, served as a permanent reminder, not just of what happened, but of how much control someone can lose without ever realizing it. To this day, the case of Kayla Monroe remains one of the most haunting examples of coercive control in modern American crime. Not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. There were no weapons drawn in public. No hostage standoffs. Just soft words, sweet smiles, and one horrifying jar. And maybe that's the question this case forces us to ask. At what point does love stop being love? Is it when someone says, "You belong to me"? Or when they believe it enough to take a piece of you to prove it?